Hey there, it's Mira. Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about a short story by Jorge Luis Borges called Tlön, Uqbar, Orbis, Tertius. Some say it's the most Borgesian of all of Borges' works because it includes a lot of his key ideas and styles of writing. Now, this is a tough one, and I don't claim to have all the answers, but I'd like to share some of my perspectives on this short story, and I'll try to break it down in a way that's hopefully easy to follow. And if you've got a different interpretation, please leave me a comment. But before that, let's first take a look at the plot of this short story. So the story opens with the narrator, Borges, having dinner with his friend BOA. During their conversation, BOA mentioned a peculiar saying from a place called Uqbar. Mirrors and copulation are abominable, for they multiply the number of mankind. Well, BOA claims to have read this in the Anglo-American encyclopedia. Borges happened to have this encyclopedia at his house, so they check it, and there is no Uqbar. However, when BOA returns home, he finds Uqbar in his copy of the encyclopedia. It's the same encyclopedia, except it's got 4 more pages, which happen to be the pages about Uqbar. The encyclopedia vaguely describes Uqbar as a land in Minor Asia, but the boundaries are marked by rivers and mountains of the region itself, which means it's not defined at all, right? And it says the only outstanding trait of this place is its literature. The article said that the literature of Uqbar was a literature of fantasy, and that its epics and legends never referred to reality, but rather to the 2 imaginary realms of Melknas and Tlön. So here we know that Tlön is a fictional place in the literature of Uqbar. And that's basically the first part of this story, and this occurs in 1935 within the narrative. Fast forward 2 years to 1937, and we encounter Herbert Ashe, an engineer Borges has met several times in a suburban hotel. He passes away and leaves behind a mysterious object, the 11th volume of a first encyclopedia of Tlön. Its first page is stamped with a blue oval inscribed with Orbis Tertius. So now we come across the third term in the story's title, Orbis Tertius. If you're not sure what exactly means, don't worry, we'll find out later. And now this volume presents a vast and systematic fragment of the entire history of this planet called Tlön, who has an entirely different conception of the universe because it's totally idealistic. People there don't believe in material existence, and everything is a product of the mind. Psychology is the only academic subject. So when the doctrine of materialism shows up on the planet, it sparks an uproar. People find the idea inconceivable and brand it as heresy. And then further information about Tlön is revealed in a postscript dated 1947, and here I think the author is playing with time because this entire story, including the postscript, was written in 1940 and published in 1941. So in the postscript, the narrator Borges says he discovered in 1941 a letter to Herbert Ashe, and the letter disclosed the secret of Tlön. According to the letter, a 17th century secret society with philosophers like George Berkeley being its members first planned an encyclopedia about a fictional country. And then a 19th century American tycoon financed this project and broadened its designs into inventing a planet. The tycoon didn't believe in God, yet he wanted to prove to the non-existent God that mortals could conceive and shape a world. Then in 1914, the grandiose project concluded with the publication of the final volume of the first encyclopedia of Tlön, and this served as the foundation for another exhaustive work written in one of the languages of Tlön, and this survey is named Orbis Tertius. And Herbert Ashe was a contributor to this survey. So I think here we can tell that Orbis Tertius is actually the name of this fictional world in the Tlönian language on the fictional planet of Tlön. And then in 1942, things got more complicated because some very strange objects from Tlön began to appear in Argentina. And that marks the intrusion of the fictional Tlön world into the real world, or rather, we should say the real world in the story's narrative. And the turning point was 1944 when a journalist discovered all 40 volumes of the Encyclopedia of Tlön, and in this copy, some of the very unbelievable features of Tlön were eliminated or muted, making it more acceptable to the real world. And this discovery sparked international fever, with summaries, anthologies, and pirate editions sweeping across the globe. And the contact with Tlön has disintegrated this world. And it is predicted that in 100 years from now, the world will be Tlön. So that wraps up a quick summary of the plot, and now I'll move on to talk about some of my takeaways from this short story. And let's look at the first sentence of this story. I owe the discovery of Uqbar to the conjunction of a mirror and an encyclopedia. Well, actually, both mirror and encyclopedia are recurrent symbols in Borges' works. And we know that mirror generates a reflection of whatever is in front of it, but this reflection lacks any material substance. In other words, it generates a mere illusion. And an encyclopedia, on the other hand, can be seen as a conceptual or linguistic mirror of the world because it uses words to describe the world. However, it too offers reflections of reality without a tangible presence. So when you put a mirror and an encyclopedia together, something very interesting happens because just imagine placing two mirrors face to face. You witness an infinite regression, and this is a concept called mise en abîme, literally means placed into the abyss. And this technique is widely employed in film, literature, and art. It involves nesting smaller version of something within itself, creating an endless loop of reflections. Just think of the iconic scene in Christopher Nolan's Inception, where the protagonist stands between two mirrors, his image endlessly replicated into the abyss. So in both film and literary theory, mise en abîme often means telling a story within a story. And I think that's exactly what we encounter in this short story, where we see different layers of fictional realities. First, we have this fictional story, Tlön Uqbar, Orbis Tertius, and let's regard this as the first layer. And within this narrative, there's the fictional country called Uqbar, allegedly discovered in an encyclopedia. So I think we can label this as the second layer. And in the fictional country Uqbar, there's a fictional place called Tlön, which later turns out to be a fictional planet. And now we've reached the third layer. And finally, Orbis Tertius is the world on this imaginary planet Tlön, and is named in the Tlönian language. So I think this marks the fourth layer. But what adds to the complexity is the deliberate blurring of boundaries between these layers. Take the invention of Uqbar, for example. Initially, we're told that Tlön is an imaginary place in the literature of Uqbar, and it's supposed to be the work of a secret society of astronomers, biologists, engineers, metaphysicians, poets, chemists, algebraists, moralists, painters, geometers, guided and directed by some shadowy man of genius. So I suppose this is some secret society situated in the fictional country Uqbar, which belongs to the second layer. But as the plot develops, it's disclosed that Herbert Ashe, a real-life friend of the narrator, is a member of this secret society. And this places it to the first layer. And where's Uqbar now? It looks that Uqbar has vanished without a trace, unaccounted for. So could Uqbar also be an invention of Orbis Tertius, or is the first layer, which the narrator believes to be the real world, already intruded by Tlön and becomes the world of Tlön? Well, a lot of questions remain unanswered here. And moreover, Borges intentionally blurs the lines between reality and fiction by providing credible contexts for unreal events. For instance, characters like BOA are not fictional. He was an Argentine novelist and a close friend of Borges, and many real-life figures like BOA make appearances in the story. And of course, the narrator, Borges, is the author himself. So this intentional mingling of real and imagined element creates a perplexing dynamic concerning the truthfulness of the narrative. And I think this blending of fact and fantasy is echoed by the intrusion of the fantastic world of Tlön into the real world, with fictional objects from Tlön appearing in reality. And I think this could be a reminder of how easily our understanding of the world can be manipulated. And this leads to my second takeaway from this story. Our understanding of the world is crafted by ideologies and philosophies created by different thought leaders who use language to construct an understanding of the world and shape our perception of reality. In this short story, Borges is playing with different philosophical arguments and conceptions. So when it comes to the unique worldview of Tlön, there's this statement. Hume declared for all time that while Berkeley's arguments admit not the slightest refutation, they inspire not the slightest conviction. That pronouncement is entirely true with respect to the earth, entirely false with respect to Tlön. So I think this suggests that Tlön is a planet that's convinced by Berkeley's arguments. And George Berkeley was a philosopher who denied the existence of the physical world. His philosophy is known as subjective idealism. He argued that to be is to be perceived. So if everything is mind-dependent, then the basic unit of the world should be an act of the mind. The world should be a combination of mental acts. I think that's like what Diamond Sutra states, everything with form is unreal. And that explains why Borges wrote, for the people of Tlön, the world is not an amalgam of objects in space. It is a heterogeneous series of independent acts. The world is successive, temporal, but not spatial. To put this into context, for realists, witnessing a sequence like a cloud of smoke, the countryside on fire, and a half-extinguished cigarette might lead them to conclude that the cigarette caused the fire, right? But for idealists, these events are perceived as independent thoughts of the mind with no inherent physical connection between them. And in an idealistic world, language would also be quite different from the language of our world. Since the world is composed of mental acts, there should be no object-based language. So Borges describes Tlön as having different languages in different parts of the planet, yet none of those languages has nouns. So instead of saying moon, people use verbs like to moonade or use adjectives like aerial, bright, above, dark ground. So in their language framework, everything becomes a form of mental construction. And Borges went on to write about the different schools of idealism on this planet, which might sound crazy to us, but totally acceptable on Tlön. However, there is one doctrine that has caused more uproar than others, and that is materialism. On Tlön, materialism is considered a heresy. The belief that there are actual objects in the world, real things that exist independently of our mind, is inconceivable and unacceptable. So in order to illustrate this inconceivable concept, a heresiarch on Tlön came up with the story of 9 copper coins. On Tuesday, X is walking along a deserted road and loses 9 copper coins. On Thursday, Y finds 4 coins in the road, their luster somewhat dimmed by Wednesday's rain. On Friday, Z discovers 3 coins in the road. Friday morning, X finds 2 coins on the veranda of his house. For realists, there's nothing perplexing about this story, right? It's easy to understand. A person loses 9 coins, and 7 of which are found on the road by others, and the remaining 2 are found at the person's own house. Nothing special about it, right? The heresiarch wanted to prove that those 9 copper coins existed all the time, even when nobody saw or knew of their existence. But on Tlön, where space is not conceived of having duration in time, people don't believe in continuous existence of objects. So if X loses 9 coins, that's merely X's mental acts at that moment. And if Y finds out 4 coins, that's just Y's mental acts. And people on Tlön argue that equality is one thing and identity another. For instance, if 9 people experience a sharp pain on 9 successive nights, can you say they had the same pain? But if to be is to be perceived, then how do idealists explain instances where everyone sees the same thing simultaneously? So take an apple on the table, for instance. For realists, that's very simple because there is a physical object called an apple and we all see it. But how do idealists explain this? Well, Berkeley argued it's because the idea of an apple exists in the mind of God. And God chooses to inject these ideas into our minds, making us collectively perceive the ideas about an apple, including shape, color, taste, etc. So the connection of objects is attributed to the divine spirit. This is why people on Tlön argued the heresiarch was motivated by the blasphemous desire to attribute the divine category being to a handful of mere coins. So we know that in this debate between idealism and materialism, materialism has clearly lost. And what is more, this fantasy world of Tlön has started invading our reality. Almost immediately, reality caved in at more than one point. The truth is, it wanted to cave in. So why did the author write it wanted to cave in? Well, I think here we need to look at the historical background. The story Tlön, Uqbar, Orbis, Tertius was written in 1940, shortly after the outbreak of the Second World War. The Great Depression in the 1930s made many people feel disillusioned with their beliefs, and that's when ideologies like Nazism grew quickly. So when Borges wrote about this multi-volume encyclopedia of Tlön that is so influential that everyone ends up seizing it as a model of thought and act, he's probably using it as a parable about the lure of ideologies in the real world. So towards the end of the story, Borges wrote,
10 years ago, any symmetry, any system with an appearance of order, dialectical materialism, anti-Semitism, Nazism, could spellbind and hypnotize mankind. How could the world not fall under the sway of Tlön? How could it not yield to the vast and minutely detailed evidence of an ordered planet? It would be futile to reply that reality is also orderly. Perhaps it is, but orderly in accordance with divine laws, read inhuman laws, that we can never quite manage to penetrate. Tlön may well be a labyrinth, but it is a labyrinth forged by man, a labyrinth destined to be deciphered by man.
So here I think Borges is trying to say that human mind can easily fall for grand narratives that offer a sense of order, and is showing how ideologies can shape societies and people's perspectives about the world. And I think the final lines of this short story provide us a peek into Borges' own worldview. At that, French and English and mere Spanish will disappear from the earth. The world will be Tlön. That makes very little difference to me. Through my quiet days in this hotel in a drogie, I go on revising, though I never intend to publish, an indecisive translation in the style of Guevetto of Sir Thomas Browne's Urn Burial. So this quiet act of defiance towards Tlön's ideology, I believe, is a reflection of Borges' own skepticism towards those sweeping, fancy ideas in the real world. Okay, so that's my take on this short story. Again, if you have a different interpretation, please drop me a comment. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more book discussions. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you soon.